Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. As happens more often than not on this show, one guest is referred by previous guests, and today's guest was referred by none other than one of our regular guests, Dr. Doug Lisle. He considers her probably the world's leading expert in the diagnosis and treatment of anorexia nervosa. It's a question we get a lot on this show for people suffering from that eating disorder, and she's here to tell us the truth about anorexia, and her name is Dr. Shan Guisinger. It's very nice to meet you.
Hello, it's nice to meet the audience and you.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I don't know how well you know Dr. Lisle, but I think very, very highly of him. And I've known him for over 10 years, and I don't often hear him recommend people, especially for something this important. But every time it comes up, somebody says, I have anorexia or I have a family member, he mentions your name and he thinks so highly of your work. And I've looked into it, and I obviously I'm not a doctor and I don't understand as much as you guys, but what you're saying, it sounds like it makes sense, and it's absolutely fascinating, and it's completely different than everybody else, which I love. I love people that are paving their own way, because I think that at the end of the day, these are the people that are going to turn out to be right. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we start, I thought we should just set a groundwork. What is an eating disorder in general, and anorexia in particular? Because I think people throw the word around now when they're using it not as a clinical diagnosis. So for example, I mentioned to you before we came on, I'm thin. I used to be obese, but I don't believe I suffer from an eating disorder with a BMI of 20.5 and eating large amounts of healthy food. But people will say, oh, you look anorexic. I mean, so what is anorexia, and who is qualified to diagnose it?
Okay, so anorexia is defined as a loss of about 15% of your body weight. And normally that makes people look real thin, although it's possible that if you're in a heavier body, you can develop anorexia when you're actually above normal weight, which we have recently realized. The best way to diagnose anorexia, as well as are you 15% or so below your normal body weight? Are you afraid of eating? Does it feel like you are doing something wrong and dangerous? Does it make you anxious to eat? Because there are many people who are naturally in leaner bodies, but they eat with enthusiasm and and they have normal fullness and satiety signals. So if the people with anorexia have a profound change in their brain, it's a genetic disorder. You cannot do it if you don't have the genes. I believe that it evolved fairly recently in human evolution, because people in Africa can't develop anorexia when they're starving. But as humans moved out of Africa, the ability to develop those genes, or I'm sorry, that disorder gets increased in frequency, so that Native Americans have the highest levels. Although with Native Americans, I think that many also have the ability to develop obesity as well, whereas in Europeans and Caucasians, people who develop anorexia typically are thin and active children, and they're thin and active after they recover from the disorder. So it comes from a lean cohort of people. And I'll show you some PowerPoint slides and explain why that is. Why that makes some sense in terms of evolution. But first, a word or two about other eating disorders and obesity. I believe that all of them are structured by adaptations to famine in our past. Humans, as you know, evolved from subtropical apes, and they ate primarily fruit and shoots and leaves. And when there was a period of cooling, and humans started to move, not humans, but our hominin ancestors 7 million years ago started to spend more time foraging on the savanna because there was less food available in general. And those individuals that could effectively stand upright more had less of their black bodies exposed to the hot equatorial sun, and they also could see further. And so the first big change from our chimpanzee-like ancestors was in this walking upright that came long before our brains got bigger, or we were hunting and gathering in groups and so on. Well, just to sort of collapse that all, humans went from eating very few kinds of plants and fruit to basically being opportunistic, omnivorous foragers. They ate everything, and because of standing upright, it changed our birth canal. So it just contorted it so that it was much harder to give birth. And women who gave birth earlier had survived more surviving offspring. And so over time, the babies, over a pretty short period of time, I'll bet, the babies evolved to be born very premature. Now, chimpanzee baby mothers take care of their baby all by themselves, and no one even touches that infant because, in fact, infanticide is a big danger among chimpanzees, but from other females as well as strange males. But humans had to get help. And grandmothers, we evolved menopause. Fathers, for the first time ever in great apes, we pair bonded. And so people had to, basically this was, if they didn't find this route, they died out because these babies needed more care than a mom could provide on her own. And so the line that led to us started to pair bond and have group breeding. What that enabled was, or what happened just as a side effect, an unintended consequence, is that it was actually possible for mothers to give birth much more frequently than chimpanzee mothers. So chimpanzee mothers give birth maybe every 5 years. We were able to give birth every 2 years. What that meant is that and then the other thing that happened is we started to hunt collectively, collaboratively, in a team. And we were so effective, and we had started using points, spears with bone and even stone tips to kill animals much larger than ourselves. And so humans became a super predator, very effective hunter, and with a very rapid birth rate. And so what happened is that we started to move into a new area with prey that didn't know what to do with, weren't familiar with this kind of hunting, this kind of predator. And our ancestors would just go through that population. And so there'd be a population increase because of all the prey that's available. And then when it's all hunted out, there'd be a crash. And what this meant was that we kept pushing out and out and out, and we kept having famine and response to the famine. So everybody starves. Some people survive and they move on, they push on, so what's really important in our eating disorders today is that we pushed into areas that were really unavailable to chimpanzees before, that had long winters with no fruit and nothing to eat, except for some prey animals. And so then we developed the ability, it had probably started in Africa, but it really got developed, I think, in Central Europe, where you see these figurines of very obese women that were clearly worshipped because she could nurse your baby through a long Central European winter. So these Venus figurines, like Venus of Willendorf, come from about 30,000 years ago in Central Europe. We obviously needed to be able to binge eat when food was available. So that's an adaptation to famine. Anyway, let me stop there and actually flip over to my slides, because I want to talk very specifically now about anorexia.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
There'll be lots of questions after you give the presentation. It's so interesting that you decided to look at eating disorders from an evolutionary perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just get this going. There we go.
You did it. I know you'll be able to get it to work because you did it before and you can do it again.
I did it before, I can do it again.
That old World War II song, we did it before and we can do it again. Just flash the green share screen.
Share the screen. There we go. Now we get the PowerPoint up. Then we push this and share. Yay, it did it. Okay, so let's go back to anorexia. I have a website that has a patient handout that I encourage anyone who's interested to download and share it with anyone you think might find it useful. And that's on adapted-to-famine.com. I just was saying this. And with anorexia, a weird thing about it is that the symptoms are the exact opposite of normal starvation, but it's the most homogeneous. So everybody looks the same. They can be a reservation, an Indian on a reservation and a sorority girl. They sound the same when they have anorexia. There are, that you mentioned that this is a non-traditional view. The traditional view is that it's caused by psychological problems in the patients or in their parents and family. And that it's caused by refusal to maintain body weight and by overvaluing body size for self-esteem. The reason that these aren't true is that many people come into therapy begging, you please help me. My body won't let me eat, but I want to be better. I want to gain weight. And many people say that it's not about looking like a model. Although everybody has anxiety about eating, and I'll explain why in a moment. Let me just, in fact, it's caused by weight loss. And this is a woman who wrote a book called Hungry Hill. And she said it was if some unconscious mechanism was triggered every time I declined to a certain weight. Day after day, my diary records, can't eat, but I had no idea what was the matter with me. And I think that anorexia is caused today by an evolutionary adaptation to migrate from famine. Think about if you were, say, moving out of Africa into the New World, and your population had been living very happily on the prey in the area, moving around, migrating around, following prey. But at some point, there is no food left. You've dug all the tubers, you've killed all the game, mountain ranges, rivers, oceans, lakes, deserts. Something stands in the way of just keeping moving on. If you wanted to try to find better lands, your hunger would get in the way of that, and your searching for food would get in the way of that, because searching for food when it's scarce takes the whole day, takes a lot of time. And so it would have been useful if you didn't have hunger, had hyperactivity, and could look at your emaciated body and see fat. So let me go back and say, these are the characteristics of people with anorexia. They eat little, they are hyperactive, and they hallucinate fat on their bodies. And as I said, they're starving. Turns out that many animals have to turn off hunger in order to migrate or molt or defend a harem. The emperor penguins can lose almost half their body weight, but they must not eat their neighbor's chick or egg. It turns out that other animals that made a living the same way humans did, as opportunistic, omnivorous, wandering foragers, including pigs and mice and rats, also, if they're starved, will spontaneously stop eating or restrict feeding. In fact, we learned that when learning psychologists back in the 50s would starve rats to motivate them to learn. And if they had a running wheel, they'd run on that wheel, ignore their own food, and they'd die of self-starvation. American consumers don't like fatty pigs, and so they bred pigs to be very lean. And if those very lean pigs lose additional weight from the stress of maternal separation or by bullying from the other pigs, they lose more weight, they will ignore their food, but they'll pace their pen and they will eat straw. So they eat straw, but they won't eat their own food. And I believe these are, in the lab cage, in the barnyard, it makes no sense at all. Today in the 20th century, it makes no sense at all. But in the environment in which they evolved, that kind of letting go of feeding and moving would have helped them find better lands. So until the advent of agriculture, people lived as sparsely distributed foragers, and they could have helped an individual, much like Joan of Arc, who had anorexia. She famously would eat only a little piece of bread dipped in some water mixed with wine. That's all she would have after her battles. She was fasting when she went to her trial. They said, "Have you been fasting?" Of course she'd been fasting. That's what she did. But she was empowered. She's most like the Pleistocene ancestors, I think, in that she believed that these powers had come to her from God to drive the English out of the Loire Valley. And she did. She was so empowered and so sure of herself that they gave her command of the army. And she actually ended the 100 Years' War, although she had been dead for a few years by the time it ended. But her activities ended the 100 Years' War. As you know, she was burned at the stake by the English, who thought she was a witch. So anorexia is caused by weight loss. We know what the signal is. It's leptin, which is a hormone released by fat cells, and it's proportional to the amount of fat that we have. And it varies just moment to moment through the day. And it keeps us eating our meals because it goes down and then comes back up when we eat. And it keeps us at a steady state throughout the year. People and animals don't have to think about how many calories they're eating for the most part. They can maintain their weight very nicely by just trusting their body, unless they happen to be people who carry a lot of genes from when their ancestors were dealing with really harder environments where it was really adaptive to store more fat. Then It's a little harder to, I mean, you've got to tolerate being in a bigger body. But for most people, even the obese, they don't have to count calories. Animals don't count calories. Our body does this very nicely, better than we can, really. Okay, so I don't know how well this comes through, but what it's showing is that there are so many altered neurotransmitters, hormones, neuropeptides that are all in the direction, except for a couple, of helping the animal restrict feeding. What's also happening at this time, and to increase activity, is that people actually become super athletes for a time. It increases pain tolerance. They have increased muscle capacity. They get more mitochondria in their muscles. They have super self-control, and of course, don't feel distressed about hunger. And they don't have the same reward for eating. Another thing that happens, let me just say, so people, the way all this neuroscience has been interpreted is that they're dysfunctions. But these are dysfunctions that give people superpowers. You know, what people can do who have anorexia, running for miles, day after day on 500, 800 calories, that is a superpower. You can't do that normally. And so it doesn't make sense to say all these changes that go in the same direction are all accidents. Another thing that happens is that when people look at their own bodies, they, normal women have, when they're looking at themselves, have activation in this is the back part of the brain that's red, and that is activation in the visual cortex and the visual association cortex. It goes dark when people are told they're looking at themselves. And what you can't see, although they can see others, this is people looking at others, they just, when they look at themselves, they go blind for a moment, or as long as it takes, and their brain fills in an image that has fat. And I think that the reason for that is that it gave them confidence to travel. I had a client who had had necrotizing fasciitis and was in ICU for months, and all her systems shut down. But she told me the only time that she really thought she was going to die was when she'd gotten a C. diff and had lost even more weight from that. And she looks at her thin thighs. She'd always wanted thin thighs, but she looks at these thin thighs and she thinks, I'm going to die. I think that if they had looked at their bodies and realized how little resources they have, they wouldn't have undertaken those journeys. So that's the body image distortion piece. And I think that, you know, in fact, we delude ourselves a lot about, you know, all our children are above average, right? You know, delusion, self-delusion or self-deception is kind of a normal part of functioning, healthy functioning. In fact, depressed people are more accurate about whether they are, you know, loved and brilliant and good drivers. They tend to see themselves more accurately than depressed, and the non-depressed people, you know, healthy people think that they are better drivers, more attractive and so on than they really are, and are more likely to be lucky than they really are. Well, this is Richard, why am I?
Carpenter.
Thank you. And Karen. This is Richard and Karen Carpenter. Now, Karen, as we know, got anorexia, and at that time, the way it was treated was to, and still today, was to work on why she cared so much about looking good for, that she would endanger her health to be thin. And it was not effective, and she eventually died. Her brother didn't get anorexia. And it turns out there's a reason for that, an evolutionary reason. She didn't get anorexia. He doesn't get anorexia because ovarian hormones at puberty turn on the, I'll go back, turn on the heritability of anorexia. So some men, 10% of people who develop anorexia are males, but 90% are females. So men do develop it. And I, think they may need to lose even more weight to do that. But for females, estrogen turns on the heritability. So that's a very specific adaptation. And it tells us that it was better for young women than for men to travel. And obviously better for young women than for children to travel. They should stay with their family. So why would it be females? Well, and another thing about them is that all these people, let me see what I have. Okay, let me go back. Okay. The reason I think is that we know from ethnographic research and history that when a brother and sister, a male and female, were traveling and encountered an enemy tribe, she would be taken into the tribe and get to reproduce, get to have children. He would be killed. And so evolution's reflecting this. If you're going to provision somebody from your band and send them off to search for better lands, pick a girl. And you pick a girl who's naturally high in conscientiousness and self-control. Conscientiousness is seen in anorexia as a psychopathology, as a problem. But in fact, for everything else, being conscientious is a really good thing. It helps you to, it's the highest thing correlated with a successful marriage. It's correlated with success in your jobs, in academia. So they were conscientious, they were young women. And here we have there was a mini epidemic of anorexia nervosa in the early Middle Ages when the Catholic Church prescribed so many fasts that some pious young women became emaciated. And the Catholic Church has canonized over 100 people for their miraculous ability to live without eating, as well as other good works. So I talked about humans being such effective hunters.
Okay, I'm in session B.
That they, when they left Africa, they ended up going to the whole world. So they left Africa maybe some 60, some 45,000 years ago. They made it, they came over here to show you how fast they're traveling. They made it across the Bering Sea land bridge 20,000 years ago. They made it to the tip of South America by 8,000 years ago. So every time they moved on, whoever got them to the next place, their genes would have increased in the population. And I think that's why there are so many people with anorexia today. 4% of women will develop anorexia in their lifetime, of Caucasian and Asian and Native American women, 4%. Although most of those people never saw in this study, it was from a big population-based study of twins. They never saw a eating disorder, a healthcare professional. They were never diagnosed and never treated. They just popped out of it on their own, which is what you would hope would happen with this. But some people get stuck, and we'll talk about them. Now, the thing about anorexia, of course, is the way it's defined right now by the DSM. It's hard not to kind of blame people for their affliction. Most people think they could recover if they wanted to. And the problem with the most popular therapy right now is that it believes that the basis of this is that people overvalue their body size for self-esteem. And that these behaviors are a way to manage stress and emotions. And they're not true, and it's insulting. And if you go into a session with this idea, you're not going to be able to help as much. And in fact, you'll think your job is to get people to care less about how they look, when in fact your job is to help them gain weight over all those, remember all those neurotransmitter things I showed you earlier, to help them gain weight over those changes. Okay. So it helps treatment to say your body's trying to migrate. It deceives you about your fat stores and your health. It creates pride in abstaining and shame and anxiety from eating. The terror people experience when they're very thin about eating is like the terror a mom would feel if she lost her kid in the mall. It's a terror that says, I've got to do something about this. And it's like the way that people will sacrifice, they'll sign up to go to war. They'll sign up to practice and practice and practice for their high school team or their neighborhood team, for heaven's sake. And they'll just practice their hearts out because this is something that they're wired to do, to self-sacrifice. So how do you help people eat? You help them to reframe, to rethink about those messages they're getting. You know, we trust our feelings, because normally our feelings are exactly, helping us. They know what to do. In this case, your feelings are out of place. You remind yourself, food is medicine. When you feel terrified, you say it's the eating disorder talking. I need to have food for energy. My meals have been prescribed. Things like this. Let me go back and just say that another thing that I think is really important is to mobilize good people, not just with children, but with everyone, loved ones, to help you, which doesn't mean they should be the food police. This is between you and you are the one, not anybody else, is going to tell you that you must eat, but they can encourage you, just like a labor nurse encourages you when you're giving birth. The labor nurse never says, "Oh, this looks hard. You can go home and come back tomorrow." They say, "You can do it. You're doing great. I know it's hard. Can I get you some ice chips? Can I bring you a warm blanket? Would you like me to rub your legs?" That's the role of the helper, is to be a labor nurse, to just cheer on their hard work. So there's a terribly important thing that happens when you're recovering from anorexia that's not dealt with in traditional treatments that think that it's due to overvaluing body size for self-esteem, or sometimes they think it's due to having a rigid or obsessive compulsive or anxiety disorder. But the thing is that what happens is that when people are almost to their healthy weight, the anorexic adaptations drop away. And what they're left with is this sense of ravenous hunger. It's been there all along, because one of the hormones that's not turned down, hunger hormones, is ghrelin. It's the most powerful hunger hormone, and it's turned as high as normal starvation. So even when someone is deep in the anorexia, they have running in the background this sense that they are, that they've got a deep hunger, which makes them sometimes afraid of, if I let go of this iron self-control, then I would just eat until I exploded. And so that kind of happens in a way that the anorexic adaptations fall away, and what they have is the normal adaptations that make people gain weight back after diets in general. And that's decreased fullness and the hunger. So it's really important that people know that, and that they're often identify with their self-control and are ashamed of the lack of self-control. But the truth is, all these things are kind of decided by the non-conscious parts of the brain, and then we take credit for them or shame after the fact. This is normal, and it's gonna go away when they reach their healthy weight. This high hunger and ability to gorge. As I said, it's an adaptation to famine. And when they reach a healthy weight, it's going to go away. But it's very important not to. This is a time when a lot of people, if they stay in anorexia for very long, a lot of people become bulimic. They realize they feel so horrible when they've overeaten or binge eaten that they throw up or overexercise or fast. And then that drives the next binge. And then that drives the next purge. So it's so important to try to not to let people know this is coming. It means you're almost there. But whatever you do, don't get into purging, because this has all kinds of addictive aspects to it, and it can hang on for decades. And it's not how you want to live your life. You know, if you overeat, you're almost there, but don't do anything to undo the binge. If you keep the binge in, it will make it less likely that you'll binge again. Okay, we talked about how it's that these can develop, that it's important to distract and postpone. The weird thing about things that are controlled by the brainstem is that they don't respond very well to your saying, I will not throw up. But they respond okay, interestingly, to your saying, okay, I can throw up, but first I'm going to call my girlfriend, you know, and then I'm going to watch some videos of cute cats. And then I'm going to, you know, and you basically try to postpone it until your the urge has diminished. Okay, as I said, most people don't. They go from thinking about food 80 to 90% of the time to thinking about it before the next meal, like, you know, to being a normal eater. And that is a blessed time, because it releases all this energy for finding their own star. Anorexia has made them cannon fodder in a way, and this is taking their life back. Okay, I wanted to, here's a plug for my book next year from American Psychological Association Press is my book, Adapted-to-Famine, is coming out. So, and let's see, you mentioned if people wanted to see me, I do Zoom, and I can see people on video chat. So, all right. That's,
wow. So will your book also be in audio form on Audible by any chance?
oh boy, wouldn't that be wonderful? I'd love it if it did. I don't think that's up to me necessarily, but I'll put a plug in for it.
So when did you get interested in working with eating disorders and specifically looking at it through an evolutionary lens? And how did you think to do that?
So I was an evolutionary biologist before I went back to school and got my degree at UC Berkeley in clinical psych. So I set out my shingle, and one of the first people I saw was somebody with anorexia, and she said, I'm sick of this. I want to get better. She was a hairdresser, and at the DSM at the time said they refused to gain weight, but she wanted more than anything to gain weight. She did see herself as fatter than she was, and she was afraid of eating, but she wanted to be well, and she tried her best. And we tried all the theories, which involved at that time, suspecting that her mother was so controlling, this was the only thing she could control. And basically, I did everything I could working with her. And at one point, she got a cold and lost some more weight. And then she became terrified of drinking water. And that made no sense at all. It's like, well, this has nothing to do with calories. She knew it, but she felt prohibited from drinking water. It was like, what's going on here? So she stopped coming to see me, and because I wasn't helping her. And I felt terrible about that. And I thought about her for a long time. And a few years later, I decided to do a postdoc at Yale in their eating disorders clinic. And I saw a lot of people there with anorexia. And some of them said, as did my first client, I would eat if I could, but I can't. Other people said, my dad felt me up and I wanted to lose my breasts, and that's how it started. Or my mom is really controlling, or I want to look good. This started because I went on a diet to lose the freshman 15. People had different explanations, but they all had the same symptoms, and they all sounded exactly alike. And so I thought about it, and finally I decided, it came to me that, wait, a lot of species turn off eating, feeding in order to migrate. And then I started to look into the literature, and I found that, in fact, there were these neuroendocrinologists that said, well, this is weird. Hunger is turned down for fats. Satiety is turned up. As soon as they start eating, their levels of powerful satiety signal go up way too fast. No wonder they start to eat and they can't continue. And that was back in 2000. So in 2003, I was able to publish in one of psychology's best theory journals, most rigorously peer-reviewed theory journals, Psychological Review. And I showed that all the evidence fit with this theory and did not fit with the other theories. Everything we know, all the phenomenology of anorexia, it's neuroscience, it's epidemiology, it's psychology. And I thought, oh, well, now I've done that, my job is done. But there's been real resistance in the field because of, that's the way these things work. And so it's a real incredible achievement that I got APA Press to do this book. So it's kind of end run around the establishment, who, as much as I kept proposing that I could present at their conferences, eating disorder conferences, there was not much interest. So I'm thrilled about this, that this idea is going to get out more widely. And I'm thrilled that you were willing to have me on your show.
I find your work fascinating, and I get so many people that write me with wanting help for eating disorders in general, anorexia and specifically, and I don't know where to refer them. So thank you very much. We have an interesting question from Jennifer, who's watching live. She says, so what accounts for the overwhelming gender differences in anorexia? If it's about searching for new lands, then why aren't more men anorexic?
Yes. I love that question. And the reason, and what we know is that men cannot develop anorexia as easily as women. That when you go into puberty, and that's when there's a big bubble of people getting anorexias, that 14-year-old, 12, 13, 14-year-old cohort, those people are as thin as they'll ever be in their life. The women are, the girls, I mean, right? Because what happens for girls is that we get our height before puberty, and then we fill out after puberty. And so you get your hormones, your sex hormones come in, and if you get ill or overtrain or something, or go on a diet, although many of the people in this cohort weren't dieting, they got there accidentally. But if you drop down so that you're like those lean bred pigs, you don't have enough weight, then you, because ovarian hormones activate the anorexia genes. They turn on the heritability of anorexia. So before puberty, you could be starving and you would not, incredibly rare to develop anorexia before puberty.
That's interesting. What does brain imaging look like in people with eating disorders?
Well, it's fascinating. Good question. There's one of the things that's, if you ask somebody who has not eaten for 4 hours to imagine drinking chocolate milk, a normal person will have activity in the part of the insula that the insula sort of gives us self-consciousness. It interprets the body to the mind, and the insula checks in with taste areas and checks in with the body for its hunger signals. And it says, oh, I'm hungry. And yeah, I remember chocolate milk. That would taste great. For people with anorexia, those two areas are dark. They are underactivated. So people can't check in with their body and find out that they're hungry or even remember how good chocolate milk can taste. At the same time, a part of the amygdala that's connected to or that's responsible for conditioned fear is hyperactive when people with anorexia imagine eating. And so that's the source of that raw terror or anxiety in milder cases, right? When people aren't so starved, it might just be a sense that this isn't right. At the same time, this is going on in people with anorexia. The part of the brain responsible for self-control is hyperactivated. So it takes people with high self-control and it makes self-control over this the highest virtue. So yeah, the brain, and this is all fairly recent stuff. So this brain imaging stuff is very, very interesting.
You know, Dr. Lyle often talks on the show about personality, and I'm wondering, does high conscientiousness often play a role in the development of anorexia?
Yes, always. These people are highly conscientious. You know, they're often A students, and it's not because they're smarter, it's because they work harder. You know, yeah, they're very conscientious. That's who the tribe would have picked, you know, like the Joan of Arc.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Monarch says, have the number of cases of eating disorders increased in the last 50 years, or are we just hearing about them more now with social media?
Yeah, so glad you mentioned that. So, you know, I've got to tell you guys, I'm in my 70s.
You're in your 70s?
I am.
Oh my God, you look amazing. I guess I thought you were like maybe 50. Wow.
Oh, last.
Wow, you're gorgeous. I cannot believe you're in your 70s.
Well, and that's relevant because I went to a small farm school in a farming community in Eastern Washington. So we were behind the times, not as hip as my friends who actually were in LA and New York, and they told me they were dieting. But I have to tell you guys, there was a time when young people didn't diet. No one in my class was dieting. I asked my friends who were cheerleaders, they agreed. No one was dieting. They did not diet. Models were 6% thinner than the average woman their age. So then at the end of the 1960s, well, middle to end, as you know, the ideal weight for women based on models and actresses and Miss America winners plummeted. And so it went from being 6% below the average woman to being 15% below the average woman. And you'll recognize that 15% number is where anorexia kicks in. And so people who were dieting to look like they're now supposed to look would, there were lots more people now suddenly dieting, young people. And now people start dieting in little children start dieting in third grade. We live in a culture that's as messed up about food as the Victorians were about sex. And I can tell you, I've lived in a time when that wasn't going on, and we could do it again. We've got to take it back. We've got to celebrate a diversity of body sizes. There are many kinds of bodies that are all healthy, and we really need to get rid of these very thin models. It's unconscionable. When we know that people die from this, it's the highest death rate of a psychiatric illness is from anorexia. But back to your question, which was, has the rates increased? Yes, it doubled. It doubled after the ideal weights for women dropped so dramatically. So anorexia has always been with us. There were little, people throughout history who would be sort of celebrated. But it doubled after people started to diet to try to look good. And something that's so pernicious about the idea that you overvalue your body size for your self-esteem. When women started to compete with other women for the best father for their children, they had to compete. They had to look better. They had to look good. They had to compete on attractiveness. It is hardwired in us to compete. It gets turned on by ovarian hormones. One of the blessings of menopause is that goes down a lot. That feeling that you have to be meeting some standard or kind of worrying about yourself. It's healthy, normal female behavior to care, just like it's healthy, normal male behavior to care that you have the resources or the potential for resources to take care of those children.
Wow, thank you. So we have a question from Natalie who's watching live. She says, what can a parent do for a daughter who is 28 years old, 5'4" tall, and weighs 90 pounds? She says she feels the best she has ever felt and is able to work and function better than ever. She does not eat in order to control a chronic skin condition and does not want to let go of the progress she has made.
Oh, yeah. So what can you do for her? So when people are first in, so she has this chronic skin condition that this is treating. So that's makes her feel good. You feel good, and many people have probably experienced that when you lose a little weight, you often feel kind of euphoric and you're not so hungry and you've got energy, and that's normal. That's one of the reasons that so many diets, get this big following, because initially all diets work. And you feel good, you feel great. And people think that would have helped our ancestors to search for food when it was becoming scarcer. And that's probably, that variation in that is probably what evolution, natural selection had to choose among, people who could keep that going longer or had more of it. So anyway, your friend has, is experiencing some of that good feelings that comes with anorexia. At some point, it stops feeling so good. You start to realize it's running you. And, sometimes it's things like getting dizzy or, running out of energy, or maybe breakthrough binging, or, at some point your friend is gonna be ready to talk about the fact that she's got a problem, that something is making her afraid to eat normally. If she can maintain and not lose more weight, then maybe she'll just pop out naturally. If she keeps going down, then what you can do as her friend is to keep saying to her, I'm concerned, I'm worried about you. But I'm not sure that, other than just letting her know you're worried, there's much you can do until she sees it as a problem.
Thank you. Kathy, who's watching live, says, I've lost 30 pounds in 2 months and I'm losing the drive to eat. Almost feels like the very rapid weight loss triggered something. So anorexia never exists without weight loss. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So very smart of you to notice that. And yeah, that's anorexia. That's what it does. It makes you lose. So try really hard to eat. You can keep this from getting kind of entrenched by eating, I think, the way Chef AJ talks about eating, lots of vegetables, lots of good food, lots of healthy organic food, 3 times a day at least. And, so make sure you're getting enough calories every day. Don't give in to that lack of hunger. Think about food as medicine. I don't have to. We're used to thinking I shouldn't eat if I'm not hungry, but this is a time when you should eat when you're not hungry.
Great, thank you. So you talked a little bit about bulimia or binge eating. Does that ever exist without anorexia first, or restricting first? I mean, these eating disorders just don't come out of nowhere, right?
Oh, there are people who, I think half the people who have binge eating are not overweight, and many people have always remembered that there are times when they have no stop signal. They'll have when as children, there'd be a really appetizing thing that they loved, and they would just eat until they were about to pop. And I think that, the Hadza, down in the tip of South Africa, well, I guess a little higher up anyway, but they're otherwise known as Bushmen or Kosa. They would have honey eaters, birds that evolved with them. So the birds and the people evolved together. The birds give a call, or the the hunter gives a call, and then the little bird gives a call, and then the bird shows the hunter where the honey is. And they're called honey guides, these birds. And the hunter will go up into the tree with some smoke, and he'll get the honey, and then they eat as much honey as they possibly can. Now, these people are always lean, you know. So I think that some of us have the ability to binge, to just eat on cue, and that it's really important, obviously, if you have binge eating and you're distressed about it, not to keep your binge foods around, or to not get overly hungry, tired, lonely, bored, and to eat lots of good food is your best thing. But sometimes it's going to happen, and it's no shame, no blame, don't worry. It saved your ancestors' lives. And it's going to happen every now and then. And it's not, as I said, I think 50% of the people who binge eat have binge eating disorder are not overweight.
It's interesting. When I watch like a Turner Classic movie and I see people in the 40s and 50s, they weren't overweight, but yet they were slender. But I don't think they all had eating disorders.
Oh, you're saying there are some people who were very slender naturally?
Well, like when you watch Turner Classic movies, I mean, Audrey Hepburn would be one example, but even when you watch movies in the 40s and 50s, people just weren't overweight, but I don't think they suffered to the degree with the eating disorders like they are today. They weren't striving. People just were leaner back then.
Oh, they were. Yeah. Yeah. Like, right. Then in 1960, 15% of the population was considered overweight. Now 34% is overweight or obese. Wow. Yeah. So people have gotten much, much heavier over time, and it's because of dieting primarily, because every diet tweaks all these various genes in the direction of let's store some more fat because we live in an uncertain environment. Yeah, but it's interesting. I guess we look at what we want to, and I back when I was in high school, I really wanted to look like Marilyn Monroe and Sophia Loren. I wanted nice big breasts, and and there were the Audrey Hepburns. Audrey Hepburn actually went through the Dutch hunger winter, and I think she had anorexia actually, and so there were, and who was that other tall, beautiful, thin woman, starred in all those feminist movies? Like, well, anyway, it doesn't matter. But there were tall, but there were also very buxom by today's standards stars. Yeah.
So here's a question from Stephanie, and it sounds like it would be good if she would work with you privately. I'm one of 4 siblings, 2 boys, 2 girls, in our 50s, grew up in a hostile environment, father alcoholic, mother dependent and afraid to stick up for us. I, as well as my sister, had severe anorexia, required hospitalization, feeding tubes, near death. Brothers both had bulimia and are both now alcoholics. We survived but struggled. And she says she's 54 and she regressed starting with anorexic behavior. She's 5'6" and weighs 68 pounds. Feels like she can't get back now. Can she fix this without professional help?
I sure hope so. Please get on my website and get that patient handout. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you and just exchange some emails if that would be helpful. Yeah, absolutely. People come back from the brink, but the food is, it's somehow, some way getting food in. Yeah.
Karen wants you to please clarify. Can you be a binge eater without having had anorexia?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. You can be a binge eater without having anything, just, it helps probably if you've been on a diet or two, but you can be a binge eater without ever even being on a diet. And you can have bulimia without ever having anorexia. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for the work you do. I mean, I can imagine the people that are watching that have children that are suffering with this. It's got to be very frustrating to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. To have a child with and it really gets a mom where she lives.
Because you can't scare somebody into eating. It's like, you see those prison documentaries, Scared Straight, where they show, well, if you commit the crime, this will be your life. But I mean, people really do die from this disease. It's very serious.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like for the child, it seems like there's a higher calling, that normally these kids are compliant, good kids, but there's something more important here.
Wow. Well, I can't wait for your book to come out. And I mean, I can help you get the Audible done. I mean, because I'm a listener more than a reader. And I just find your work really fascinating. And just as an aside, your skin is amazing. Do you have any skin secrets? Because I'm blown away that I figured you're maybe like 50. And what's your secret to aging well?
Well, I had a skin cancer. Here, they dug out with the Mohs procedure about 20 years ago. And ever since, I have been just scrupulous about never letting my face be in the sun.
That's my new secret. That I didn't used to be that way, but I find that makes the biggest difference as we age, is to avoid the sun on the face at least.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Well, congratulations on the book. Please let me know when it comes out. Maybe we can do this again, because many people are interested in this topic, because it seems like everybody either knows somebody that has it or they have it, or especially with the binge eating, a lot of people really struggle with that. And I think that, it's funny because I feel like I'm recovered. It's been like over 40 years, but I feel like in some ways the bulimia was worse, because like with anorexia, all I had to do was just not eat, which, you just kind of like lay around and conserve energy. But with bulimia, that was like a full-time job. That was really more, for me, more devastating.
Yes, yes. And you were fighting your own self much more, probably. It didn't feel right.
Yeah. Well, I hope people know there is hope, there is recovery, and I hope that they'll seek out a professional like you, specifically for those that are mentioning their weights are, 90 pounds and 68 pounds. And, I hope they will get help sooner than later.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Guisinger. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. We have another fabulous doctor for you tomorrow at the special time of 2 p.m. Her name is Dr. Shipra Bansal. Thanks again, Dr. Guisinger. Take care. Bye-bye.